And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and we've just gotten done talking with Gennady Stolyarov, who has written a children's book called Death is Wrong, but on the broader issues of technological change and what they mean for our future. As you know, we deal with that here on the Zero Hour. We talk not only about the issues of the day, although those are important, but about the long-term human future and what we might be doing about it now. And in that line, our next guest is an important thinker in this area. James Hughes is the executive director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, where I am or was an affiliated scholar. I haven't checked lately. He's a bioethicist, sociologist at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where he teaches health policy, one of my former full-time professional areas, and serves as director of institutional research and planning. He's member of all sorts of groups, all sorts of interesting efforts. He is author of Citizen Cyborg, Why Democratic Societies Must Respond to the Redesigned Human of the Future, and is working on a second book tentatively titled Cyborg Buddha. James Hughes is known as Jay to his friends, and he is my friend. So Jay, how are you?
Very good, RJ.
It's great to talk to you. It's been quite a while. And I guess before we start, I should let our audience know that you have described yourself as, among other things, a techno-progressive. Am I using the terminology correctly?
That's right.
And what is a techno-progressive?
Techno-progressive is someone who takes seriously that there are going to be a number of policy issues coming onto our plate in the imminent future as a result of accelerating technological change and the convergence of technologies. A lot of those issues aren't taken seriously yet by a lot of people in public policy. They are dismissed as science fiction. And we also distinguish ourselves from folks in futurism who kind of hand wave at these problems or adopt a libertarian approach, pretend that the market will fix everything or that magic nano dust from heaven will fix everything. And so we want to position ourselves as folks who take seriously these emerging technological issues, but want to address serious public policy to them.
Now, I don't know if you describe yourself as a transhumanist, and for those listeners who don't know the term, transhumanism basically, well, you can probably summarize it better than I. Do you consider yourself a transhumanist, and what is a transhumanist?
I do. A transhumanist is someone who believes that it's both morally acceptable and technically feasible to use technology to transcend the limitations of the human body and brain. So things like radical life extension, cognitive enhancement, genetic engineering, those kinds of technologies, that those can be morally defensible for individuals to apply to themselves. I am a transhumanist, but another way to define a techno-progressive is kind of a left transhumanist, someone who sees all the ways that those things could go wrong if we don't adopt the right kind of policies.
So here's, by the way, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but I think the last time I saw you was years ago at an IEET seminar where I spoke. A number of us spoke, and at dinner that evening, I was asked, "Are you a transhumanist?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Then you are not a transhumanist. You're a non-transhumanist." And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, what will you do in the future?" And I said, "The next indicated right action." And my point being, I guess, that aren't these terms sometimes divisive? For example, I might not identify, and in fact don't identify as a transhumanist, but if a new technology came along, I tried Google Glass for the first time last month, thought it was pretty cool. If a new technology comes along that enables me to merge with or more easily communicate with the internet, or I need an artificial limb that's neurologically controlled, I'll be all for it. So just as I'm all for having a cup of coffee in the morning to jumpstart my brain so that I can start writing. So I guess my point is it really, I mean, clearly you've made the decision that to identify as a transhumanist is one way to advocate for progressive and just applications of new technologies, but isn't there an argument that might be made that just by advocating for them as they arise, that's another way to achieve the same goal?
Well, I understand the argument, and it's an old one in our progressive circles as well. I mean, I cut my teeth as a young activist as a socialist, and the question was always, well, why call yourself a socialist? Why not call yourself a progressive or an economic democrat or something? And then one of the reasons why we adopt ideological terms is because ideology has a real semi-permanent existence in the world. If one were to say, well, I'm not a socialist, but I'm for, significant redistribution of wealth and for union rights and for national health insurance and so on and so forth, people are going to say, yeah, but you're really a socialist. Similarly, if I say I'm not a transhumanist, but I'm for people's right to take cognitive-enhancing drugs, I'm for their right to use cloning once it's safe and effective, I'm for their right to do genetic engineering to make themselves super strong, people are going to say, okay, you don't say you're a transhumanist, but you really are a transhumanist. So I just go with it. It's a reality that I'm on the transhumanist end of the spectrum.
Well, okay, fair enough. And among other things, you in a past life were a Buddhist monk, right?
Right.
And so, in a sense, transhumanism is the transformation of the self that doesn't exist.
Well, my approach to the relationship of Buddhism and transhumanism is kind of summed up by Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, which is that we should have the courage to change the things that we can, and the serenity to accept the things that we can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there are a lot of things about the human condition that we are increasingly capable of changing. We need the Buddhism to still live a serene life and not be overly acquisitive about the things that we will never be able to change. But Buddhism doesn't counsel that you stand there in the middle of the road while a truck runs you over. It says you can get out of the way. So similarly, yes, there is no self, but that doesn't mean that you don't get out of the way of the truck.
Right, right. The courage to change the things we can, the serenity to accept the things we can't, and the willingness to augment ourselves so that we can change more of the things we can't. That might be another way to look. But now, interesting that you mentioned, for example, the use of cognitive enhancing drugs, because that makes a good segue to one of the issues I wanted to talk to you about. We're talking with James Hughes, the director of the Institute for Ethics in Emerging Technology. I never get IEET.org, and you wrote a two-part piece about cognitive enhancing drugs with the provocative title in part one, "Are we obligated to make ourselves more moral and intelligent?" Meaning, in other words, as I read it, reversing the argument from do we have the right to take these drugs and augment our cognitive capabilities with them, to do we have a moral obligation to take them? Is that a fair summary of the question you were posing?
That's right. I mean, I'm writing this book, as you mentioned, Cyborg Buddha, and one of the things that it's led me to is a deeper engagement with both Western and Eastern virtue theory. And the virtue theory, instead of the Enlightenment notion of the liberal individual, we should leave each other alone and have rights to our autonomy, a lot of people make arguments for stimulant drugs, cognitive enhancement drugs on those grounds. They say, look, if it's not hurting anybody else, people should have a right to take them. But I've been increasingly interested in how you articulate an argument for a good version of character, how people can live a flourishing, full life, which doesn't just say, well, if you want to take heroin, you can go lie in the gutter and take heroin, but say, no, that's not a good version of a full life. We want to encourage each other to this richer form of life. And that means that there has to be some element of character development and virtue. And so the argument, I think, can be a lot stronger on behalf of stimulant drugs and cognitive enhancement drugs in general, which is to say that they are generally used both for the treatment of ADD and by students who use them off-label for academic purposes in the service of various virtues. And they contribute in their use in society to the exercise of virtues. And so I think that's a much stronger case than just saying let people do it.
Well, it's a fascinating argument, which unfortunately we're going to run out of time to explore. The last time we spoke, I think it was for about an hour. We don't have that kind of time now, but I hope you'll come back because it's fascinating, including the question of, well, who decides? Who decides what is moral? Who decides what is a favorable use of technology? So clearly, it's a conversation that we'll have to continue going forward. James J. Hughes, director of the Institute for Ethics in Emerging Technologies, professor of public health policy and philosophy and all sorts of other interesting things. Jay, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Anytime.
You bet. And I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be right back. Don't forget, whether it's today or thinking about the issues of the day or thinking about the next 500 years of human history, this is the Zero Hour. I'm RJ Eskow, and we'll be back after this.